If you clicked on this video, that probably means that you've also been seeing some familiar headlines in the news recently.
That phone in your pocket right now might be a government spying device.
First of all, the fact that people think they have personal privacy is laughable.
That bald fellow with the adorable ears announced a disinformation governance board in order to combat online misinformation.
Researchers have found the use of antidepressants is soaring.
Some of the most famous dystopian novels ever written were a warning to future societies in hopes that humanity wouldn't fall back into past mistakes. But recently, it seems like we've been ignoring these warnings, and people are beginning to notice.
Look, there's two authors that haven't been wrong yet. Orwell is the most quoted, Huxley is the least quoted.
But now it started moving back towards the Handmaid's Tale.
When I first read Fahrenheit 451 in high school, I thought, wow, what a dystopian, wild idea.
But this got me thinking, did these authors really know what they were talking about? Were the events in their books just fiction, or were they turning out to be more reality? I've decided to find out, so join me as I investigate which dystopian novelist got it right. Okay, first up. 1984 is easily one of the most famous novels ever written. It's the gold standard of what a totalitarian society looks like. The government has jurisdiction over every aspect of its citizens' lives, and it rules with an iron fist. It's a warning from Orwell about the slippery slope from freedom to totalitarianism, and it's a pretty convincing one. Winston, who's the main character of the book, works in an office building called the Ministry of Truth. And in this building, whole departments of people spend their days creating, changing, and most importantly, destroying words. The goal of this is to create a new language, a language called Newspeak. The goal of Newspeak would be that it's much smaller than the English language, so much so that it would make ideological and political opposition literally impossible, as the words to form those opinions wouldn't even exist. This idea of destroying words for ideological reasons is nothing new. People have been trying to make their own version of Newspeak for quite a while now. I mean, take a look at this. From Stanford University, the Elimination of Harmful Language Initiative. Oh, just before I get into it, I have to warn you, this website contains language that is offensive or harmful. Please engage with this website at your own pace. Take a breather if you need to, grab a drink of water if it gets too much. You know, take care of yourself here. Well, let's humor them. Let's see which harmful words they're trying to eliminate here. Can't use fireman anymore because that's offensive to women, I reckon. Oh, here we go. Can't say crazy because that's ableist. Can't use ballsy. Brave. Can't use brave. Instead of using the word brave, you should use nothing. You can't use the word brave anymore. Oh, victim. Not allowed. Instead, use person who has experienced or person who has been impacted by. Rolls right off the tongue. I mean, listen, we can all have a good laugh at this, and if you haven't read this list, I suggest that you do it because it is hilarious and it is a good time, but it's a lot less funny when the government starts to legislate things like this. I mean, this is the whole issue that made Jordan Peterson famous, right? The government of Canada tried to legislate what you could and couldn't say, and people didn't like that very much. Because most people don't believe that it's good when the government can tell you what you can or can't say. But I always find myself asking, why are they doing it? I mean, if you ask them, I'm sure they would say compassion or empathy, and maybe that's true. I mean, we all want to be polite and kind and as respectful as possible, so that could explain it. But I mean, also, do you know many people that are offended when you say hold down the fort? At some point, it's not compassion and it's just a power trip, right? At the end of the day, we gotta ask ourselves, is it really worth it letting the government dictate what we can or can't say on the basis of politeness? If your answer is yes, I wonder if it would still be yes if the government determined your language to be harmful and said it needed to be eliminated. Once a day, everyone in the Ministry of Truth would gather around a telescreen for a special propaganda broadcast called the 2 Minutes Hate. During this segment, they're shown visuals that evoke the strongest emotions of rage and hate towards one person, Emmanuel Goldstein. Goldstein is the enemy of the party and the enemy of the people. He's the leader of an underground rebel group known as the Brotherhood, and he's the most hated person in the country. They bombard the audience with chaotic visuals and sounds that turn a normal, passive crowd into a rage-filled mob, only at the end to turn that hatred and anger towards Goldstein into love and adoration for the government. This just in, news and political commentators bear a striking resemblance to George Orwell's depiction of the 2 Minutes Hate in 1984. Instead of telling you what's happening, we'll tell you what to think, how to act, and most importantly, who to hate. But don't worry, instead of lasting 2 minutes, we've made sure that you can tune in anytime and we'll tell you exactly what opinions to have. 24/7, 365. Brought to you by Pfizer, of course. The most feared institution in Orwell's society is without a doubt the Thought Police. They're a shadowy government organization that the people don't know much about, but they know one thing: the Thought Police could be anywhere. It could be your neighbor, your coworker, your brother, or the random guy you just passed on the street. The Thought Police had one goal: to track down any dissenting beliefs, actions, or even thoughts. And there were no laws to abide by either, no official standard to follow, just a bunch of unspoken rules of conduct that, if violated, meant death. It could be something you said, something you wrote down, a twitch in your face, or just an unsavory thought crossing your mind. And all that's assuming you were lucky enough to not talk in your sleep. It didn't matter if it was intentional or not. Even the slightest oddity in your life could cost you your life. Punishing someone who violate these vague, undefined cultural laws is becoming dangerously common in the West. It started off with comedians getting scolded for jokes and celebrities being canceled for old tweets. But suddenly these people were being brought before human rights tribunals and being charged with crimes and even having their bank accounts suspended. In order for the party to stay in power, they must ensure that their leader, Big Brother, is always right. If the public loses trust in Big Brother, they lose trust in the party. Winston's job at the Ministry of Truth is to comb through all of Big Brother's speeches, fix any contradictions, alter any predictions that are wrong, and overall just rewrite history to ensure that Big Brother is infallible. There's one point where a party member is giving a passionate speech about the country that Oceania is at war with, Eurasia. And the party line is that Oceania has always been at war with Eurasia. But suddenly, during the speech, it became known with extreme suddenness everywhere at once that East Asia, not Eurasia, was the enemy. And it was done so quickly that the speaker had switched from one line to the other, actually mid-sentence, not only without pause, but even without breaking the syntax. There's no lie that the politicians wouldn't tell to stay in power, and as it turns out, there was no lie that the citizens wouldn't swallow. At this point, Winston gets recruited by the Brotherhood, and they give him a book to read, and this book kind of lays out the blueprints or the inner workings of the society that he lives in. It reveals one of the key tactics that Oceania, as well as the other two superpowers, use to stay in power. And that's the idea that all three of the superstates must always be at war with each other, but none of them be allowed to win. There's nothing to be gained by winning either. Each of the superstates is already self-sufficient with their own resources and labor. They remain fighting for the sole reasons of using up excess resources and keeping the population wrapped up in wartime hysteria. They're constantly airing updates of the war on the telescreens about battles and victories that may or may not even be real, but they keep the population distracted by the hatred for the enemy and the love for Big Brother. Now, some may take this quite literally because it does seem like there are some countries that can't seem to keep themselves out of international conflicts. But I think the bigger idea here is not warfare, but rather the state of emergency. If there's always some form of global emergency, whether it's real or exaggerated, the government will always have a reason to try and grab for power, because they're the only ones that could protect you from these massive global problems that you individually don't really have any control over. Whether it be the COVID emergency or the climate crisis or an economic collapse or Russia or China or a threat to democracy, it always seems like there's some catastrophic event looming over our heads, one that we can't do anything about, but the news is always trying to get us to care about. And oddly enough, it always seems that the people we put in charge to solve it are the people that would benefit most if it never gets solved. Towards the end of the book, Winston gets captured by the Thought Police, and he's being interrogated by a man named O'Brien, and O'Brien is trying to convert him to party orthodoxy. O'Brien claims that the party's control over reality is absolute, but Winston claims that the party can't have control over reality because they don't control the laws of nature.
You don't even control the climate or the law of gravity. And there are disease, pain, death.
But O'Brien explains to Winston exactly how the party wields power over nature.
Reality is inside the skull. There is nothing that we could not do. I could float off this floor like a soap bubble if I wished to. You must get rid of those 19th century ideas about the laws of nature. We make the laws of nature.
And this is where Winston realizes something very important. If O'Brien truly believes in his head that he floats off the ground, and he can convince Winston to also truly believe that he floats off the ground, then the thing happens. And I gotta be a little careful here on YouTube, and where I'm from, we don't have a little thing called the First Amendment. You lucky Americans, so I gotta be slightly cautious of how I phrase this, but our culture today appears to believe that we have control over the laws of nature, that biological reality doesn't exist, or if it does exist, only in the mind. This passage is trying to warn us of our own hubris. When a society gets too powerful, it starts to think it has authority over truth itself. It's Orwell reminding us that there is no your truth or my truth, there's just the truth. It doesn't matter if everyone in the world believes something. If it's not true, it's not true. I think Orwell summarizes this really well in what I think is the best passage in the whole book.
The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. His heart sank as he thought of the enormous power arrayed against him, the ease with which any party intellectual would overthrow him in a debate, the subtle arguments which he would not be able to understand, much less answer. And yet, he was in the right. They were wrong and he was right. The obvious, the silly, and the true had got to be defended. Truisms are true. Hold on to that. The solid world exists. Its laws do not change. Stones are hard, water is wet, objects unsupported fall toward the Earth's center. With the feeling that he was speaking to O'Brien, and also that he was setting forth an important axiom, he wrote, "Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 make 4. If that is granted, all else follows."
But what if Orwell is wrong? What if the future world is not a dilapidated, oppressive one, but rather a brave new world?
You see, George Orwell and Aldous Huxley were friends, but they couldn't have disagreed any more on what a totalitarian state would look like. George Orwell's vision was a boot stamping on a human face forever, whereas Huxley, in his book, describes a society that has no leisure from pleasure.
The London of Huxley's story was not the repressive nightmare of Orwell's imaginings. Rather than a society that was always lacking, a brave new world was one of plenty. Everyone had enough to eat and drink, they all had luxurious homes and private helicopters. It was a very luxurious society. This means that the governing body, known as the world state, had to find ways to keep the population subdued and preoccupied, to keep them from getting restless. They did this through overwhelming the population with what they call pleasant vices. The sex instinct is flipped on its head in a brave new world. People are told to sleep around with as many people as possible because that's the polite thing to do. People with monogamous tendencies are scolded and told to be more respectable and sleep around. School children scoff in disgust when they find out that the old world considered children non-sexual beings and instead are taught to play erotic games with each other. And when they're not sleeping around with each other, they have the feelies, which are like 4D pornographic movies that they can go see whenever they want. Even epsilons, which are at the very bottom of the society's hierarchy, are given 7 hours of mild, unexhausting labor, and then the Soma rations and games and unrestricted copulation and the feelies. When I look around at our world today, I feel like we're also completely overwhelmed by these pleasant vices. And we didn't need a government to come in and enforce it upon us. We did it to ourselves. Everywhere we turn, there's these products or services that want to give us these like quick hits of dopamine and appeal to our baser animal instincts. But at the end of the day, none of them are conducive to human flourishing. The Brave New World was a society that went from valuing truth and beauty to happiness and comfort. And that sounds pretty familiar to me. On the rare occasion that the citizens would have to go through something mildly uncomfortable or, heaven forbid, boring, they have Soma. Soma is a drug that the world state developed to be the perfect drug, the best and long-lasting high with no hangover to follow it up. And so when anyone wanted to escape anything in real life, they would just pull out their Soma and pop a few tabs. The World State described it as virtues in a bottle because it'd make you patient, easygoing, and kind, all without putting in any moral effort at all. It looks like Huxley's predictions are coming true. We live in the most prosperous and wealthy time in human history, and yet alcoholism, antidepressants, ADHD, and drug use are all on the rise. Even though on paper our lives are getting easier and easier with technology, we work way less than any generation before us, but it always seems like we're looking for some sort of Soma to get us through. At one point, the world controller named Mustafa Mon is revealing the how and why behind the society that they live in to a few of the characters. During this conversation, Mustafa reveals something that's quite shocking to the characters. He reveals that the society views science as antithetical to their pursuit of eternal happiness. In fact, Mustafa says that science is actually dangerous, and one of the characters who he's talking to named Helmholtz is shocked by this. He claimed that the society were always saying that science is everything. It's a hypnopedic slogan. Mustafa says that science has to be chained and muzzled. He likens the kind of science that they do to a cookbook, an orthodox theory of cooking that nobody is allowed to question. There's one point in the book where Mustafa is given a new scientific paper and he reads it and he finds it to be very accurate, but he throws it out because he says it would cause instability. But of course, the science they're talking about is not real science. They're talking about an orthodox theory of cooking that must not be questioned. So many people have staked their careers on the science, and now we can't do real science because oftentimes real science includes being proven wrong. And when your career's on the line, you can't really do that. Now, this is just a quick one, but one of the official slogans of the Brave New World is that everyone belongs to everyone else. And I mean, just take a look.
There's no such thing as someone else's child. No such thing as someone else's child.
When you see our kids, and I truly believe that they are our children, they're the children of our country, of our communities.
Our nation's children are all our children. These are not somebody else's children. They're all our children.
I mean, come on guys, make it a little bit harder to draw a line from evil dystopian governments to your government. Like, stop making it so easy for me. This book really came into the news again due to some recent events in a particular country. I saw so many headlines talking about its cultural relevancy, so onto the list it went. The Handmaid's Tale takes place geographically in the United States, but the government's been overthrown by a theocratic dictatorship known as Gilead. It's led by ultra-conservative and religious men who've reduced women to property and hand out the few remaining fertile women as concubines to the men in the government. So let's see what The Handmaid's Tale has to say about our society. Here's the thing, obviously, radioactive topic, right? I'm not here to change your view. Whatever your view is, that's yours and that's fine. All I'm doing, I look at the book and I look at society and I see if there's any overlap, and that's all I'm gonna do. In The Handmaid's Tale, Gilead has outlawed abortion completely, but also made it legal to kill babies after they've been born, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And that's kind of a theme with Gilead, them doing things that doesn't make any sense, but we'll get to that later. But the idea is that the government made abortions anywhere for any reason punishable by death. Now, to compare this to the whole issue that sparked this conversation in the first place, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, I just don't see how the federal government giving up its ability to make a top-down rule on abortion either way is anything like the tyrannical rule of Gilead in The Handmaid's Tale. In fact, I would say the federal government giving up its power to do this and giving it back to the states where people can vote and make changes based on their belief is the most democratic thing you can do. So I don't think that issue in The Handmaid's Tale is any way comparable to what's happening in the states right now, but obviously a lot of people disagree with that. So if you're one of those people, drop your arguments in the comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say. I really did go into this book wanting to like it. I was rooting for it. So many people had told me oh, you gotta read this book, you gotta read this book. So I went into it with an open mind, but there's just a fundamental flaw that will keep it from being competitive with the other books on this list. All the other books explain the why behind the society, not just the what. Well, what are these evil governments doing, but how and why did it end up like this? They all illustrate the strategies of propaganda and demoralization and distraction and censorship and manipulation that these governments use. They show the slow march from freedom to totalitarianism. But in A Handmaid's Tale, it's not like that at all. Instead, a bunch of terrorists that no one's ever heard of just come out of the blue and kill everyone in the US government and overthrow it. And I guess we're just supposed to believe that the US military, which is the most powerful fighting force the world has ever seen, just does nothing about it and lets the terrorists take over and kill everyone. It just doesn't make any sense. And that's all fine if you're writing fiction, but if you're gonna try to bill yourself as speculative fiction, you're just gonna have to try a little bit harder to sell me on your vision of societal collapse. I don't know, I could see how someone would just enjoy it and read it as a good story, but when you're stacking it up against some of the most influential books ever written, it just doesn't hold up. Fahrenheit 451 takes place in a world not too different from our own. People live comfortable lives, they have jobs and cars and entertainment. But what separates this book from the others we looked at is the fact that we're given almost no information about the ruling government. Instead, we're given a close-up look at one of the local institutions, the fire department. It may seem odd to have a fire department at all in a world where all houses are fireproof. But their objective is a little different. Their goal is to hunt down and burn all remaining libraries or book stashes in the city. Because in Fahrenheit 451, all books are illegal. You see, Bradbury wasn't very subtle in his portrayal of government censorship. The idea of the government having a whole institution devoted just to hunting down and torching books seems a little far-fetched, but I think the real story here isn't the censorship itself, rather the reason behind the censorship. Montag, who's a fireman and the protagonist of the book, has become a little bit skeptical of his role. He starts to think that maybe burning books isn't the right thing to do, and in his guilt, he decides to call in sick one day. And his captain calls his bluff and wants to have a chat with Montag. Captain Beatty explains how the firemen are the custodians of the peace of mind, and also the official censors, judges, and executioners.
You must understand that our civilization is so vast that we can't have our minorities upset and stirred. Colored people don't like Little Black Sambo. Burn it. White people don't feel good about Uncle Tom's Cabin. Burn it. Someone's written a book on tobacco and cancer of the lungs. Cigarette people are weeping. Burn the book. Serenity, Montag. Peace, Montag. Take your fight outside. Better yet, into the incinerator. What do we want in this country above all? People want to be happy, isn't that right? Haven't you heard it all your life? I want to be happy, people say.
And there you go, the why behind the what. They burn books to keep people from being offended. To keep them happy and docile. Don't give them any troubling material that they have to sit down and think over. Happiness is what matters. In this same monologue, Captain Beatty explains even more how their society is built off this one idea, that happiness is the most important thing in a person's life.
So bring on your clubs and parties, your acrobats and magicians, your daredevils, jet cars, motorcycle helicopters, your sex and heroin, more of everything to do with automatic reflex. If the drama is bad, if the film says nothing, if the play is hollow, sting me with the theremin, loudly. I'll think I'm responding to the play, when it's only a tactile reaction to vibration. But I don't care. I just like solid entertainment.
I mean, it's pretty similar to some of the stuff that Huxley was talking about in A Brave New World, but it's worth noting that Bradbury picked up on it too. A population that's always entertained, distracted, addicted, and shallow is a population that's easy to control. This is probably the most accurate prediction of any of these books. It's a little scary how close it gets, and it hits a little close to home, I'm not gonna lie, at least for me. One of the ways that people are kept distracted and entertained are with little devices called seashells. These seashells are small white thimble radios that fit in your ears. They would play radio or music for whenever people were away from their home TV system so they could get their fill of entertainment. And yeah, this observation really made me look in the mirror and question some of my life choices, not gonna lie. Now, after reading all these books back to back, it kind of paints a bleak picture of the future and the present. They all talk of government tyranny through censorship and lies and propaganda and torture, manipulation, vice, distraction, fear, and oppression. They all seem to focus on top-down rule in ways that average citizens like you and I are powerless to stop. When I started this video, I wanted to see which of these dystopian nightmares was most accurate today. But as I read them, I started to see that even though they all painted completely different pictures of the future and how we got there, there was one common thread that they all seemed to share. One technique that all of the dictatorships in these books rely on completely. And most importantly, it's something that you and I have complete control over. It's the kind of thing that once noticed and pointed out, the government is completely helpless to stop. In each of these books, the government has been able to completely infiltrate the citizens' lives, all because of one thing. All because the government has destroyed the family. In 1984, the very foundation of the party is completely reliant on this idea.
We'll cut the links between child and parent, and between man, and between man and woman. No one dares trust a wife or a child or a friend any longer. But in the future, there will be no wives and no friends. Children will be taken from their mothers at birth as one takes eggs from a hen. The old civilizations claimed that they were founded on love or justice. Ours is founded upon hatred. There will be no love except the love of Big Brother.
In Fahrenheit 451, having kids and raising a family is scoffed at because it interrupts the flow of constant self-satisfaction.
No one in his right mind, the good Lord knows, would have children.
I wouldn't say that, said Mrs. Bowles. I've had 2 children by cesarean section. No use going through all that agony for a baby.
Children are ruinous. You're out of your mind, said Mrs. Phelps.
I plunk the children in school 9 days out of 10. I put up with them when they come home 3 days a month. It's not bad at all. You heave them into the parlor and turn the switch. It's like washing clothes. Stop laundry in and slam the lid.
Even The Handmaid's Tale, for all its flaws, gets this right. The idea of fidelity between a man and a woman has been completely rejected in favor of concubines and state-sanctioned rape. In order to move their society from archaic ways of reproduction into the more enlightened ways of eugenics and artificial wombs, the Brave New World had to convince the population that families were evil.
R. Freud had been the first to reveal the appalling dangers of family life. The world was full of fathers, was therefore full of misery, full of mothers, therefore of every kind of perversion from sadism to chastity, full of brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, full of madness and suicide.
What I thought would be a message of fear and despair from these books actually turned out to be a message of hope. They all teach us something important, and that is the best way to fight tyranny and oppression is to love and cherish the people around us. Thanks for watching. Okay, if you don't want the cop-out answer, it's a Brave New World. I mean, it's a close second, 1984. I mean, like in like 10 years, I could see 1984 being the answer. But if you look at right now, in the present, it's got to be a Brave New World. So, Brave New World, 1984, Fahrenheit 451, and then somewhere down there is Handmaid's Tale. But there you go, there's the answer.